In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So on Thursday, we're going to celebrate the Feast of the Ascension, which is what? Tomorrow. That's how many days after the resurrection? Andy.
50.
Wrong.
40.
40. Why is it on a Thursday? It's always on a Thursday, right? So Sunday is always resurrection. 40 days after Sunday is always going to be a Thursday. So it's always called Ascension Thursday. And then after 10 days, we're going to celebrate the Pentecost. So that's the 50 days, right? So Ascension kind of comes in the middle somewhere. And so in preparation for Ascension, last week we read...
Why is it?
Yeah. Huh?
Why is it
A Thursday? Because 40 days after Sunday is always going to end up, if you count, it's always going to be a Thursday. Yeah.
So why is it 40 days?
Because it happened 40 days after the resurrection. So in the Bible it says 40 days after the resurrection, Jesus ascended. Yeah. In Gospel of, in Acts. So in the Gospel we say, my Father's house, so Jesus says this to prepare for Ascension. He says, my Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. All right, so he says, I go to prepare a place for you. Right? And it's important, very, very important to always note that every feast of the church is never a feast just for Christ. It's a feast because it's important to my salvation. So we don't just celebrate something Jesus did. Right? So the transfiguration isn't like, wow, look what Jesus did. Isn't that cool? Right? The transfiguration has to have something to do with my salvation, personally. Okay? And so similarly, the ascension isn't just his ascension. It has to be my ascension. Right? So we rejoice in the ascension, right, the feast, because Christ seated us with him in heaven. Right? Because it's almost like a circle, right? Imagine a circle. Christ comes down to earth, takes a flesh, takes which flesh? My flesh, human flesh. Right? He says, now I'm going to do the Eucharist. You're all in me and I in you. And then I'm going to go back up to heaven. And I'm going to prepare a place for you and take you with me. Right? So his ascension is my ascension. He's raising me with him. Right? Just like we say, the resurrection is not just his resurrection, it's my resurrection from the dead. His crucifixion is my crucifixion. His ascension is also my ascension. So he says, I will come back and I will take you to be with me. Right? And so this is why the procession always in the church, there's a symbolism to the procession. It starts in heaven, right? We go around the altar 3 times. Then we take the procession, the icon, whatever it is. We go around the church 3 times as if Christ came down out of heaven into earth. He dwelt among us. He lived with us. And then we go back into the altar, right? Going back in the altar is the ascension, right? He comes, he takes us with him, and then he goes back in. All right, so now we can say it's my ascension into heaven. And now it's I who sits at the right hand of the Father with Christ. Right? And he raised my humanity with him because I'm in him and he's in me. So wherever he is, I am. So Father Matthew the Poor has this great quote. He says, this means that the resurrection alone is not sufficient. After the resurrection, there are glories of the living in the divine presence where we sit with Christ on the right hand of his Father. Wherever Christ is, we have the right to be, right, by the spirit of adoption. So it appears that the ascension is part of this spiritual progress, right? So we think about just as the cross, right, is completed with the resurrection, right? We always put the cross, and we say the resurrection comes right after, right? And the resurrection completes the crucifixion. Right? We can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion, right? And we can't think of the crucifixion alone. In fact, one of the criticisms of the movie The Passion, if you have to criticize the movie, you'd criticize it ends on the crucifixion. It doesn't tell the whole story, right? Because it's kind of hard to just see the crucifixion and focus on it and say, without thinking, but there's a resurrection right after that, right? Because just otherwise it's just a really sad thing, okay? So we say the crucifixion was completed with the resurrection. And then we can say that the resurrection was completed with the ascension and the sitting at the right hand of his Father. It's part of this progression that started with Lent. Right? So in Lent, we crucify our flesh, right? We spend 55 days, 40 days, whatever, right? And we crucify the flesh, we crucify the passions, we focus on ascetic practices like fasting and matanyas and disciplining our flesh so that we can partake with Christ in this crucifixion. After that, Christ is risen, we rise with him, and we feast in this milieu of the church, right? This holy 40 days, right? Where we look at like just everything is festive in the church. The tunes are faraihi, everything is festive. We say Christos anisti to each other, right? And we feast in this spirit. And then Christ says, enough of this. Do you still want to be down here? Right? You've crucified your flesh. You've resurrected with me. We're all celebrating this resurrection. And he says, do you still want to stay on earth? You shared with me the feeling of conquering the body, conquering yourself. And by doing so, you conquered death. And where do you want to be now? So now we take the next step spiritually. And this is what St. Paul says in Colossians, if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Seek the things that are above. And in fact, when you look at the story of the Ascension, that's exactly what happens, right? When you read it in the book of Acts, it says, after he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up at the sky as he was going, when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them, men of Galilee. They said, why do you stand here looking at the sky? So isn't this such a beautiful image? Right? You can imagine, he's standing there, and he just ascends in front of him, and they just stare. And it says this cloud hides him, but they're still staring. Like, where did he go? And then these two men dressed in white show up and say, why are you staring at the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way. I love this image, looking at the sky. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Focus on the sky. Right? Can you imagine Lazarus after he comes back from the dead? After being raised from the dead? What's he like? Now what? Is he worried about his retirement? Is he worried about this guy that took $50 from him that shouldn't have taken $50 from him? He's thinking about the sky. He's thinking about heaven. His mind isn't even down here. It's like, yeah, whatever. School, whatever. Work, whatever. Wife, whatever. Kids, whatever. I'm looking up at the sky. Right? You can imagine coming back how little everything mattered to him. You know, his aunt fighting with his other aunt about who makes better couscous, right? And he's just like, who cares? You know? And so I want to talk about the sky for a second, right? It's one of the beautiful things that God gave us in the creation. Remember, everything in the creation teaches us about the Creator, right? It's kind of like when someone writes a book, right? You feel like you've read enough of this person's book that you know the author. You know them by their books. You know them by their art, right? In fact, you know, engineers, when engineers look at each other's work, or architects look at each other's work, they'll say, I know who did this. I can tell by the lines, right? I'll tell you guys a funny story. None of this matters. I have two icons in my office from Isaac Fanous. Do you guys know who Isaac Fanous is? You should know. He's a very famous iconographer. He's the renaissance of Coptic iconography was created by Isaac Fanous. He's very famous. He died a few years ago. And when the guys came to paint the chapel, how you doing, Habibi? Good. When the guys came to paint the chapel, they stayed at our house, and I brought them in my office, and I showed them my two Isaac Fanous icons. I didn't tell them. And so Fedi, who's a master iconographer, he walks in, and he's looking at all my icons, and he looks at the two, and he goes, who did those two? I have about 80 icons in my office, okay? And he picked out those two. He goes, who did those? And I go, you have a good eye, Fedi. You must be a famous, world-famous iconographer. Those two are by Isaac Fanous. And because they're signed on the back, says Isaac Fanous. And so he stares at them. And he goes, I'm sorry to break it to you, bro, but those aren't Isaac Fanous.
No way.
I'm like, what? What are you talking about? It says Zach Fanus on the back. It's like, it may say Zach Fanus on the back, but those aren't his brushstrokes. He doesn't paint like that. He paints like this. Those aren't his brushstrokes, right? So he can tell Zach's work by just looking at it. He can see his handiwork. You know, they asked St. Anthony once, a bunch of philosophers came and talked to St. Anthony, and they wanted to test him, and they saw how wise he was. And they said, how did you learn so much about God? And he says, I just observe nature. You can learn a lot about God by his creation. You can learn about the Creator by his creation. I just watch the natural order of things, and I figure out how God thinks, right? So God makes nature for us, and we can learn about him from it. And one of the things that he put in nature that's very interesting is the sky, right? Because no matter where you are, you just have to tilt your head and you can see the sky. Anywhere on earth. Unless maybe like New York City, certain parts, you can't see the sky. But other than New York City, and you can see dirt in the air, see dust anywhere you look, right? But anywhere, anytime, you can look up and you can see the sky. And it's really a beautiful thing because no matter what you're going through in life and how bad things get, all you have to do is you tilt your head and you say, there it is. And so I want to think about a little meditation about the sky. 3 things about the sky, right? And you should do this once a week, once a day. Look up at the sky for 5 minutes and think to yourself, this is where I came from. I came from there. Like, that's my home. I'm not from Alhambra or Anaheim or Long Beach or Huntington or Irvine or wherever I'm from. I'm from there. And then the second thing I want you to think about is that's where I'm going. I end up there. That's home. This is just a vacation, right? It's like when you take a trip and you go to Mexico for a week. You're not Mexican. That's not your home. You live somewhere else, right? And so think about, this is where I came from and this is where I'm going. And then the third thing I want you to think about is, I wonder what people up there are thinking about what's going on down here. When I have a really big problem, and to me it's overwhelming. Sorry. I wonder what, if I had a heavenly perspective, what it would be like. Right? If I could see it the way the saints saw. What if St. Mary came right now and just appeared to me? What would she say about my problem? She'd go, don't worry about it, baby. It's going to be just fine. It's really not a big deal that the In-N-Out, added cheese to your burger even though you really didn't want cheese. I know it's very upsetting for you right now, but you're going to get through this. With therapy, you can make it, right? And so, a great quote by Emba Pimen. He says, do not give your heart to that which does not satisfy your heart. Think about above. Don't think about the earth, right? Don't give your heart to the earth when the earth does not satisfy your heart, right? And so, our goal is to seek above. So the ascension is us saying, I don't want to be part of this place anymore. I'm not from here. I didn't come from here. I'm not going to end up here. Like, my body just decomposes into nothing at some point, goes back into the earth, right? And the part that lives on isn't the part that's earthly. So knowing where I'm from is the first part of this, right? It's the beginning of who you are. And so when we're baptized, we took on a different citizenship. We're not from here anymore, right? As Jesus said to Nicodemus, this is a new birth. You're born again, right? And so I want to read you a nice quote. He says, almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this reality. All of our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on this earth. When they want to convince you that the earth is your home, notice how they said about it. They begin by trying to persuade you that earth can be made into heaven, thus taking your focus off the sense of exile in earth. Right? And so one of the many ploys that Satan uses is to focus us on earth, keep us from staring at the sky. Look around, right? The idea that with with the right social and political policies, if you made the programs, the right programs, we could make earth into heaven. We could fix earth. We can make it this perfect place. If you look at a lot of the idealism of Marxists and communists and all of these ideals, it's let's make earth a utopia. It's actually satanic. The earth is a fallen, broken place, right? And we're never going to make it into heaven. It's not heaven. It's a fallen world. Next thing, this is where I'm going. So the first thing is this is where I'm from. This is my citizenship. Next thing, this is where I'm going. This world of deceit and fraud has no riches for us, right? There's no permanent city for us. There's no lasting home for us. There's no honor. There's no fame. There's no true comfort here. Everything, every glory that the world gives us is a facade. It's all fake. It all leaves. Every degree, everything you think you want, every kind of recognition by people and recognition by institutions and recognition even by the people at church or by the church. It all passes away, right? Saint Ephraim has this beautiful quote. He says, if you give all your life to the earth will give you a tomb. Right? That's how this ends, in case you don't know. But if you give your life to heaven, heaven will give you a throne. And so again, this beautiful image, look up. Why are you looking at the earth? Why are you looking around? Why are you so focused on what I'm doing and what's happening? And are the Lakers up or down in the series? They're down. They're down and out. Right? So how would I act if I actually knew this isn't my real home? Right? The same way I act when I go on vacation. I'm a sojourner. That's what we say in the liturgy, right? I'm just a traveler. I go in, I hang out, I sit by the pool, I have a margarita, and then I leave. Right? I don't try to fix the place. I don't try to care so much about it and what's happening and, who's fixing the potholes in Mexico and how the corruption is in the political. I'm there for a week and I'm gone. Right? And that should be our view of earth. Right? We are stewards of the earth, no doubt. And we are called to love the earth because God made it for us. Right? But this isn't my permanent home. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm not going to try to make it into a better place. The best I can do is be the best me I can be. Okay, skip that part. All right. Okay. So I want to meditate on this one verse. Arise, let us go from here. Arise, let us go from here. And so one of the spiritual diseases of our time, I think, is like we feel we're doing okay. We're satisfied with our spiritual lives. And this happens to 90% of us. We just get to a point where we're like, I'm doing all right. I don't have butter in the kunefa during Lent. I'm killing it. Right? I'm doing it. I showed up early to liturgy. I'm killing it. I've learned some hymns that no one knows, and I can make these sounds with my throat. I'm amazing. I'm killing it. Right? And what we do to make ourselves feel better is we define Christianity by very achievable targets. We lower it. And we say, you want to be holy? Don't eat butter during Lent. That's holiness. Right? You want to be holy? Go to church early. You want to be holy? Fast this day and this day. And then you go, I can do that. And then when I achieve that, people go, wow, you are holy. You are righteous. You are amazing. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. So by lowering it, I make it into something I can beat. And when I can beat it, I feel good about myself. And I just want to feel good about myself. Right? We want to consider ourselves pretty good. I don't do anything too bad. I don't kill people. But if we don't move forward, spiritual life stops. And so God's plan for us is to continually strive, right? And one of the ways, by the way, he teaches us this is, we always say the human is comprised of soul, body, and mind. And if you look at the body and the mind, they both work the same way, which makes me think the spirit works the same way, right? What happens if you stop learning? Do you just stop? What happens after high school? You never read or listen to another thing. So you have this much knowledge, right? You have 11 units of knowledge when you graduate high school. After 50 years, do you still have 11 units of knowledge? Do you still remember all the stuff you learned in high school? No. It deteriorates. It decays. In fact, after 3 weeks after high school, you don't remember half the stuff you learned in high school, right? So the mind works that if you don't continually feed the mind and you continually challenge the mind and you continually push the mind deteriorates. It's not like you stay at the same level, right? What about the body? Right? What if you get in good shape when you're 18 and you say, all right, I'm in good shape. I will stop now. I'm in good shape. Do you stay in good shape? What happens? You deteriorate. In fact, what happens if you don't use a muscle? What happens to a muscle? What's the word I'm looking for? Atrophy, right? The muscle dies, right? When you have a cast on your right leg for 3 months and you take the cast off and your right thigh, your right quad is 2 inches less in circumference than your left one, what happened to the muscle? It atrophied. It died. Why? Because you didn't use it. You didn't push it. You didn't work it, right? So the mind and the body do the same thing. They die if they're not used. They die if they're not pushed forward. The spiritual life is the same way. You don't get to a spiritual point and say, I'm good now. As soon as you say that, you immediately start dying. You immediately start decaying in the same way. You have to continually strive forward. And that's what St. Paul says, right? Forget what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, right? And that's why when you hear something like, I've been serving at this church for 28 years. Who cares? What does that even mean? You can put that on your resume, but that doesn't mean anything in the spiritual life, right? Because God isn't an accountant who's counting the number of years you served, right? Or I've been serving Sunday school for 5 years. Well, who cares? What about this moment? This is the only moment that counts, right? So if I'm not striving forward, straining, as St. Paul says, straining towards what is ahead, that's the spiritual life. It's a movement. And so even though I think I'm doing pretty well, Christ wants us to do more. Arise, let us go from here. Seek those things which are above, straining towards what is ahead. As the disciples said during the Ascension, looking at the sky and aiming for the sky. Right? So what are we striving towards? What are we talking about? Everything on earth is vanity of vanity. The only thing we strive towards is our Father. That's the only thing we look at. And where do we see him? Do we see him in the Bible, in the liturgy, in the prayers? Yeah, we do. But we cannot mistake them for him. He is not in them. He comes through them. Does that make sense? The Bible, the prayers, the liturgy, they are not God. We find God in them, but they are not it. They are a means to achieving him. And they're good images of what we really desire, but we can't mistake them for the thing themselves. Right? All right, I'm trying to decide how much more I should go. Anybody have any questions? I can just stop here. Yes?
Can you explain the balancing act between keeping our eyes and our hearts on heaven and also being present at all times and knowing who you're talking to, knowing what's around you, knowing because we're called to be present because God is in the moment. So we're supposed to lift up our eyes and hearts.
There's a difference between looking at heaven and focusing on heaven and being aloof and not with us, right? So it isn't like I'm saying, hey, Archie, how you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking about heaven. What'd you say? I mean, it's not like that, right? So what is it then? It's, I see God in everything. I see God in everyone. I see God in creation, right? So I take a walk on the beach, I take a walk in the park, and I don't see trees, and I see God's creation. I talk to Christian, and I see the image of God in him, right? I see work, and I see God in every situation. I see God in every person, right? So there is nothing that isn't him, right? I mean, one of the saints says, I touch God, I see God, I eat God, I wear God, like that. That's his. There's a story about Pope Kyrillos. It was told actually by Tanta Semira, so as an actual, witness. And she said they were having breakfast after liturgy, and he cracked a hard-boiled egg, and she said she watched him crack this hard-boiled egg. And he just sat there and he peeled this egg ever so slowly and just stared at it as he peeled piece, and she just watched him, and she said it took him forever to peel this egg. And then when he was done, he just stared at it like this just for a while. And this isn't one of his famous stories. This is just a lady who knows him, who had breakfast with him one day. And he just stared at the egg and he goes, isn't God amazing? Right? So, I mean, most people are like, oh man, when you don't boil them right, the peel doesn't come off, and then it's flaky, and my wife didn't do it right. You're supposed to let it cool and put it in cold water afterwards because otherwise it sticks it, right? So one person is at the level of earth with the hard-boiled egg and just wants to get over it. Okay, where's the salt? Where's the salt? Okay, I like it with salt, right? And he's right. He's very there, right? He's more present than anyone, and he's very intense. Isn't God amazing, right? So that's it, right? Laser focus, laser attention, and God's in everything and everyone. I know I've told you this story many times. You guys know the story about the Mount Athos monk? I told you this one. Everyone knows this one. You know this one? Yes, Andy.
So, when you talked about the fact that obviously we're sojourners and we're gonna, we should really care about what happens on Earth, really. How does things like global warming, fossil fuels, stuff like that, climate change, how does that take into effect? Is that like the part where, God gave us the Earth to protect and whatever, or do we just not have to care about that stuff?
Well, it depends if you're a Republican or Democrat. So the question is, global warming and polluting the rivers and, over mining and over foresting and all this stuff. Should we not care about these things since we're not of the earth, right? And there's some people that take that perspective and I think that's wrong, right? I think, especially as Orthodox Christians, we're called to be stewards of the earth, right? It was given to us as a steward. The word steward, wakil in Arabic, means, someone like, you're the manager of a Chick-fil-A, right? You don't own the Chick-fil-A. You're just the manager. Your job is to watch over the Chick-fil-A. You make sure no one steals from the Chick-fil-A. You make sure the Chick-fil-A is clean. You make sure it produces good food. You make sure it doesn't catch on fire. You don't own it. You just manage it, right? So that's the way we're given the earth as a steward, right? It's not ours, right? We manage it. I love this quote. It's I think an ancient Indian quote. It's borrowed from our grandkids. It's lent to us from our grandkids, right? So I like that perspective. And so even if you look at the ascetics and the monks, the way they thought about the earth, it's in today's words with a very light footprint. They tried not to disturb too much of the earth, right? They wouldn't take more than they needed. They wouldn't, that concept is very important, I think, as a Christian. And I do actually have a talk on, it's in the SoundCloud somewhere, on being environmentalist and how that's a very Christian thing. And it's a very important thing, right? Because if you view the earth as something I just need to exploit and extract from and take from, then that's not the way you view a gift from God. You know, that's not the way you trample on something and get as much as you can out of it while you're alive, you know, and who cares about anyone else? You know, I would never, you know, if I gave you a car and said, you know, you can just drive my car, you know, while you live with me for 3 months, and you do donuts in the thing and you peel out and you drive over the curb, and you're like, well, I mean, you know, you told me I can drive it. Yeah, but not like that, right? But I didn't break it. But you're not respecting me by driving my car like that. It's not your car, it's my car, right? So you're going to peel out and do all this stuff, you know, it doesn't make sense. Good. Yes?
What was the Mount?
Huh?
What was
The Mount Athos story. So there's a show called 60 Minutes. It's still on. It's a 1 hour show, 60 Minutes. And it's like a deep news, like a audio video magazine, right? Where they do in-depth reporting on particular issues. So they did a thing on Mount Athos, which is a monastery in a peninsula off the coast of Greece. And it's a very holy place. There's dozens and dozens, I think hundreds of monasteries in this area. It's very hard to get to. You actually can't go there without a visa. So if I want to go to Mount Athos, I have to get a visa. They have to give me permission to go. Women are not allowed on the mountain at all. And it's just this, you know, it's like the pinnacle of holiness, right? So anyway, so they did a show, and they wanted, like 20 years ago, and they wanted to do another show. So they asked the monks if they could get permission to film a show on Mount Athos. So they, after 2 years of waiting, they allowed them to video this show. So the guy's interviewing the head of the monastery, one of the monasteries, the abbot, and he's like thanking him. He's like, you know, I appreciate you guys, you know, our news crews are here, and I know you don't let just anybody come, and this is a really big deal, and I appreciate it. He's like, okay, sure, no problem. And he said, you know, I know we're being very disruptive, and, you know, we're disturbing your prayers and everything, so we appreciate it. And when he said we're disturbing your prayers, the abbot laughed. He just kind of chuckled, like just very quickly. And he goes, oh, no problem. And then the commentator guy, the interviewer goes, well, I noticed you laughed. Why'd you laugh? And he goes, oh, no, nothing. It's fine. No, it's, you know, you're fine. You're not disturbing us too bad. He's like, no, you laughed when I asked you when I said I was disturbing your prayers. He goes, oh, no, just, you know, no big deal. And he's trying to blow it off. And he goes, well, I mean, aren't I disturbing your prayers? And he says, no. And then the guy goes, the news guy goes, well, I mean, are you praying right now? And the monk says, of course I am. Which I just love that answer, right? I know I've said this story so many times, right? And he just looks back and goes, of course I am. You ask me a question, I pray, I answer. And then I pray. And then you ask me another question, I pray, and I answer, right? So it's kind of like the hard-boiled egg, right? He's very much present in the moment, and he's very much aware of God being in that moment, right? It's that mix. God is in everything, right? And so he laughed when the guy said, you know, he's probably praying at that very moment when the guy said, I'm disturbing your prayer. He laughed because he's like, yeah, I'm actually just kind of tuning you out and, you know, and praying anyway, right? Might be saying arrow prayers or whatever. So that's the story. If you want to Google it, if you want to YouTube it, it's probably on YouTube. Go to 60 Minutes Mount Athos and you'll find it. All right, so the last... Yes, good.
One question.
No, good.
You said we should probably, or the best way is focus on being the best version of ourselves and focus on our prayer, you know, alone with God. Wouldn't that deter us from creating like organizations or foundations that could help our fellow man? I remember one talk you said like that's the Salvation Army, like that's the Red Cross, like they focus on that, but you should probably focus on your relationship.
I mean, the way I view things is, and I think this is, you know, the way I think we should approach things is the first concept is I'm not from here. I focus on above, right? So I would look at things as concentric circles, okay? So the first concentric circle is just me and God. That's the core, right? And we have to be tight. Okay? Once we're tight, okay, then I can go out and maybe I can like talk to my cousin, right? You know, and then maybe if that's, you know, that light is bright enough, then maybe I can go out a little further and maybe I can, you know, talk to Sunday school, right, or a few friends, and then these concentric circles get bigger and bigger, right? But once you're really far out and you're kind of out there, and then all of a sudden you feel this like, you know, you lose your peace and you lose your ability to help, and you lose your way. You immediately have to collapse back to that first circle. You say, I'm out there now, you know. My objective is now to build a building. Right? It's not my salvation, right? And so the objective of all the things we do is my salvation, right? Building a foundation that will outlast me, right? That's a very human legacy kind of way of thinking. It sounds good, but it actually isn't, right? Because it's got a lot of ego in it, right? I want something that'll outlast. People will remember me. You know, he started this. He did this thing, right? So that's just ego, right? The only thing I care about is me and my Savior, me and my God, right? And if God calls me through that relationship to say, now, you know, you do this or you do that, okay, I'll listen, right? And a few people are called to do these things, but I think a lot more people think they're called than they are. Right? Most people, your calling is you have to stay close with God. And then God brings to you what he needs you to do. You don't have to go out looking for it. Because often when you go out looking for it, you're looking for your own, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to be remembered. This is how I want to be thought of at church. I want to be thought of as a theologian. I want to be thought of as a really good deacon. I want to be, right? That's just what you want. That's your own pride, you know. I'll share with you a personal experience. My confession father was a person named Abu Antonius Hanin. He died in 2006, and he was a great man. He's one of the giants of the LA diocese. Okay, it's one of these, you know, the pillars of this diocese, right? And he was a deep theologian. He was a big reader, and when I was in college, I wanted to be like him. And I bought all these books, and I would read all the time. And I know you can't tell from my talks now, but I used to give like really into it talks, right? You know, history and theology and dogma and liturgy, and that's what I focused on and specialized in. And when I moved back here, I've had all these books that I've bought over decades, right? And I have this massive library. And when I moved back here, there's someone in our diocese who's now a priest who is a theologian. He's a reader, right? And when I saw him, I moved back here, I came back, I invited him to my house, and I showed him my library. He was blown away by my library because it's pretty impressive. And I said, you can take whatever you want. He's like, are you kidding me? And he's like pointing at these series. He's like, this series is out of print. Each one of these books costs $160 to buy. And I have the whole series, and you can't get them. I said, take whatever you want. Knock yourself out. And he just loaded up books, boxes of books, right? And then at some point, he just looks at me and goes, why are you doing this? And I said, because I'm not a theologian. That's not my calling, right? I fancied myself as a theologian. That's what I thought I should be. And that's what I tried to be. And I realized that's not what God wants me to do. That's not me. You are. That is your calling, right? So that's who you are. That's who you need to be. But that's not me, right? So sometimes we can, even within the church, we can fancy a calling that isn't ours, you know? I want to be known as the guy who did whatever, and, well, that's just your own ego. Maybe God wants you to go to Nineveh, and you're not interested, right? Good? Good. All right, so focusing on the ascension, this is where we see ourselves focusing on the things that are heavenly, right? And We see ourselves soaring above the cares and the delusions of the world. It's all vanity of vanities, as Solomon said, right? And, so the true Christian, he lives for the feast of the Ascension. That's actually one of the greatest feasts, although it comes on a Thursday, no one goes to church. Content with the things above, looking at the sky and thinking, I can't wait to go back home, right? That's where I'm from. That's where I want to go back, right? So the Feast of the Ascension takes on a whole new feeling for us, right? We just stare at the sky and say, that's really what I'm about. Everything on earth, whether it even be a church service or the foundation that's going to feed people, and that's great, but that's not really my focus, right? My first concentric circle is me looking at the sky. And that connection has to stay very tight. And so there's an idiom that I want you all to think about. We say this to people every once in a while. We say, be above it all, right? And sometimes you'll hear someone say that about another person. Say, just, that guy, he's above it all, right? Which means he just, he's above all this garbage, right? Nothing affects them. Why? His head's in heaven. His head's in the clouds, right? So he's very much on earth and rooted in earth, okay? But he knows, he has a perspective, right? Okay. Any other questions? I don't know if that was all clear or not clear. Good. That was the Insta. Just giving you a hard time. All right. Glory be to God forever. Amen.